Hello, everyone. My name is Dal, and I'm the CTO and co-founder of a startup called Blub Blub. We are making apps that help children with their speaking and language abilities. Our apps contain more than 1,500 custom-made videos and several exercises that have both speech recognition and face detection. I want to share with you today a couple of tips and tricks that I've learned along the way. I'm an engineer in my heart, so this talk will be coming from an engineering perspective, but it will be a little less technical than you're usually used to. So please bear with me. It has now been 4 years since I first publicly talked about Blub Blub. At the time, we were testing our business model, and a couple of people asked me a very simple question. Are you making money? I was a little bit evasive because their suspicions were correct. At the time, we were not. Our app had a single in-app purchase for a couple of dollars, and it did sell, however, definitely not enough to support us completely. About 4 years later, we have more than 1 million downloads, and we have helped thousands of children speak their first words. So, how did it all start? Most of the time, I'm asked by people, how did we get such a good idea? They tell me that they know how to build any kind of app. They just don't have the idea good enough to start with. Is that all you need to start? Many people think so. And there is some truth to that, but the idea is still a very small part of it. Other people think that they have their idea and it will most certainly go viral. So they're very scared about telling it to anyone. But there's a long way from the idea to the working app, and that requires a lot of sweat and a little bit of luck. So unless you already have a plan to make it yourself, you do not have to be afraid to talk about it. It's always good to discuss different ideas and apps with your friends and colleagues. They might have a day-to-day problem that needs solving. That could help you get the idea on how to do that with digital means. Maybe your friends are just waiting for someone to come along and help them build it. Who knows? They could be your first customer or even a future team member. Usually people will respond with something like, you know what would be amazing? If I could just use an app for this. So you're still stuck with the idea. No problem. Take a look at the market, whether that's App Store, Play Store, or any other app market. You can start by going through the apps that you're using yourself. Then ask yourself a couple of questions. Why exactly are you using this particular app? Which problem does it solve for you? Is it missing an important feature? What else can you make better? Try by changing your mindset. Go from an engineer and become an inventor. Something revolutionary doesn't always have to be something that doesn't exist yet in any shape or form. But it has to add some new value and has to be better in something at least. Remember, was Facebook really the first social network? Was Google the first search engine? Was iPhone the first smartphone? And there are many more examples like that out in the world. I took this slide from one of our old pitch decks. So how did our idea came to be? That me and my co-founder started working together, it was really just a series of coincidences. We realized each one of us had a speech impairment when we were little. I actually couldn't say the letter R in Slovenian. And we were all interested in building something on our own. We had experience on several technical fields already, such as design, engineering, marketing, and user experience. But none of us had very specific speech therapy knowledge, which was the area we were attacking. And none of us had built up an app or a business before from scratch. But we started talking with people that were willing to share the knowledge that we didn't have on our own. And that has really helped us along the way. And as soon as you decide on the idea, start working on it. Focus on the main thing and do not worry about the details. You need to validate the idea as quickly and cheaply as possible. Basically, that means you should get the answer to the next question. Does your idea solve a problem for a potential customer? And to answer that, you do not always need to build a working implementation. You just need to make the potential customer think that it actually works. And there are several ways to do that for mobile apps. For example, you can use Xcode storyboards without any code, Apple Keynote, or any other tool that makes the prototype a little bit more user interactive. It is critical that you validate this with users that could be your potential customers. After a couple of prototypes, you will be more confident that the idea will work. If you're not, that's okay. Just continue to play with prototypes. And as soon as you are, start working on defining your minimum viable product, or MVP. I'm sure that many of you had heard this term before. What it means is that you should find the minimum set of features to get that idea out to the market. It is always great to have a lot of features in mind, but that comes later in the future. Just think about what will be enough for the core idea to work. For example, that our first MVP was only an iPad app, and it was only in Slovenian language, which is a really small market, but it did serve its purpose. We just needed it to test if our concept is working in the reality. Building the MVP still requires a working implementation, as this is not really a prototype anymore. So you need to think which technology and what platform to pick. Maybe just choose the one you're most proficient in. Use third-party libraries as much as you can. You really do not have to spend days developing that perfect calendar component when there's a perfectly good open source solution out there. It might just look a little bit worse. Also use third-party services for things such as analytics, crash reporting, user testing, and so on. Many of them have free or very affordable startup plans for small projects. And if they don't, it's also worth just calling them up and talking to them. And maybe you can explain them the situation and you'll figure out something together. You can always replace them later with your own solutions. It's also okay to leave a couple of rough edges and minor bugs. Your app doesn't have to be pixel perfect, so do not spend too much time on the UI. Users will gladly accept a less pretty interface, especially if it solves a major problem for them. It can also happen that you will throw most of the work away. Maybe the idea itself doesn't work, or someone else will beat you to the market. It has actually happened 2 times in our case, when we rewrote the app entirely from scratch. It is quite common that startups go through several MVPs, but what matters is that you have learned something new from each one, and that will most definitely come helpful to you in the future. It's also a good idea to think about the business model, even in the early stage. Games, for example, mostly use microtransactions with coins or gems or rubies. Other apps will go for one-time payment or a recurring payment with a subscription. So if you plan to scale your app, you will want that many people will use it. Then somehow you will have to fund it. Based on your idea, what do you think makes most sense? If you still have no clue what the business model would look like, try looking at some similar apps or products in this field and see what kind of model they use. Then try to get a feeling of how good it works for them. Keep in mind, you can always experiment with this later, and there are many apps that switched from one-time purchase to a subscription model lately. So, you've gotten so far. Congratulations! You're now ready to publish your first MVP. And to do that, you will have to go through some kind of process to set up your company. And the app will probably have to go through review. It's also okay if you're rejected. Maybe you just missed a guideline. The reviewers are generally very nice people, and they will help you and explain to you what you did wrong. So just fix it and submit another version. After approval, you are finally ready to push that release button. I am sure you will be excited. So, what happens next? Start by making your app visible. Go through your social media, ask your friends for help, and get as many people as you can to try it out. Start collecting some feedback. The feedback you've gotten back is good, and you've learned a little bit about your users and your customers. So now you want to spend more time polishing your app, and for that, you will most likely need some funding. There are several ways to get it. You can start by contacting some people and asking them if they know any angel investors. Or you can look for open seed camps or accelerators, which offer early stage funding. There are several in every country, and they all have different approaches to funding. So it's important that you do your own research and do your homework and get to know yourself with a couple of startup terms. Check maybe there's a government grant available in the country that you could apply for. And start attending some events that are meant for startups and founders and try speaking with some people there. Get their feedback and hear out their suggestions. Networking and communication are really the key skills for this. Later, you will discover that the app market is overly saturated on all platforms. It will be really hard to find an app that nobody made or even attempted yet. But you're sure that your app is better than the rest. Even so, if nobody can ever find it, it is pretty much useless. Cases like Flappy Bird or Angry Birds, those are really rare. But that doesn't mean it's not possible. It's likely that when you will scale, you will have to pay for your customers. So it's a good idea to start thinking about your ideal customer pretty early. Who are they? What are they like? How will they be using your app? Maybe try running some simple ads with images first. You do not really need a professional video production house for this. We tried all kinds of things, from memes to jokes, funny images, and so on. Start thinking about your marketing strategy. We also did not get much viral traction at the start, but we believed in the idea. We tested it, and we knew it worked. So we put in some of our own money into Facebook and we started test running some ads. It's now really easy to set up Apple Search campaign. On the other side, if you know an influencer or a blogger, they might be able to help you spread the word. And if everything goes as planned, you'll soon see those App Store charts go up. You really must know your user. Start getting to know them as soon as you decide on the idea. Sometimes your customer and your user will not be the same person, which was also in our case. Adjust your marketing strategy accordingly. Start by getting some feedback. Ask users to jump on a call with you and ask them some questions about how they are using your app. Give them a reward, something that will not cost you anything, such as free access or a very long trial. And keep in mind, the market will change, so do not stop with this process for as long as you're working on your app. Why is this so important? There are several things you may have missed out during prototyping as well. Now let's look at a couple of examples, what we have learned when we were prototyping our app. So our app was originally designed to be used by kids from 2 to 6 years old. After launch, we learned that kids really do not care if that button has your perfect shadow, and they do not have any set expectations of how the interface should work. Let's watch a short clip from one of our testing sessions. Think about what happened here. So this prototype was done in a way that the button will always react to the default touch up inside event, something we're mostly familiar with. And it's a very good idea to use it, especially if you want your user to be able to cancel their touches. But kids really use the app differently, so a touchdown event is a much more appropriate, even with older kids. Another example is with scroll views, where it's also a very good idea to disable the content touches delay to make the app feel a little bit more fluid and more responsive. Let's take a look at another example. In this case, we wanted to grab the child's attention, so they would actually tap on a button. And animations are a really great way to do this. So we added an animation that makes the button jump. Let's see what happened. So mission accomplished. The child does notice the button, but it is really hard for them to press it because it jumps from underneath the finger. So the point is that in reality, apps can really be used differently. Later, we added a feature that kids can take a selfie while practicing with our face filters, similar to Instagram and Snapchat, just in a more educational context. And this is what happened. We've gotten a lot of selfies back from the ceiling of their home. Kids are naturally holding the device in a different way because their arms are not long enough yet. And because we were testing this too late, we also discovered this problem when the feature was already in production. So how do you fix this? We placed an overlay that showed a placeholder, and until the entire face was on the screen, the user will not be able to continue with the app. So what about unit testing? Is it a good idea to spend the time to have the MVP thoroughly tested? In my opinion, no. You should definitely cover the most critical parts with a couple of tests, but just don't spend too much time. If you know the code will remain in the app for a longer period, then add more tests, of course. But it will most likely go faster if you can get a couple of people to help you out with manual hands-on testing. This, of course, still depends on your app and is still your decision as the engineer on the team. As the business will start to grow and more users will be coming into your app, you will have to keep up with it. That means that at some point, you will have to consider questions like, does my product work on the web? And when do I need a backend? So it's good to start thinking about platform growth early on because the implementation will always take some time. Think about if you want to do it yourself or you will need to hire some help. So you have decided that it's time to start building a backend. So go back to the MVP mindset. What is the minimum requirement for the next few months? Maybe a client-side framework such as CloudKit would be sufficient for the next phase. Think about other mobile platforms as well as the price. CloudKit is very affordable, and it is also possible to use it on the web or on Android. Firebase, on the other hand, is much more expensive, but it also has a lot more features. And there are other good options out there as well, such as MongoDB Realm or Parse. When I was in this position, I was already an experienced iOS engineer, and I've also had a lot of experience building websites with PHP. But at the time, I have not worked with web for at least a couple of years. I just needed a small REST API to provide our app with content and data. So I didn't really mind learning something new. I started by doing a little short research on several popular platforms, including Laravel, Ruby on Rails, Django, server-side Swift, and Node.js. I didn't work with any of them previously, but I knew the language basics. I discovered that Swift was way too early stage at the time, and I thought it would change too much. And I was the least familiar with Python. And I've also felt I've kind of finished my PHP story, so the final choice was between Ruby on Rails and Node. I decided for Node because it seemed it had a much smaller footprint and I did not need all the features Ruby on Rails offered. But that doesn't matter. Your choice might be different because the situation and the tech stacks also evolve. So pick whatever makes most sense and do your own research. What about other mobile platforms? Depending on your stack, think about how much codebase you will be able to share. We only share the data models and some third-party libraries such as Realm, but we do not share much code directly between platforms. We also started with Android a little bit later. And also, you do not need trouble knowing every little detail of each platform. It might be better to find other people that know more specifics than you and just rely on them for help. So how do you start scaling the code base for more people? We started out from a single repository of the entire iOS project. As the project grew, we started separating the code into several parts that made sense together, such as database and networking layers, UI components, and more. When scaling, we also had around 50 third-party libraries, many of them CocoaPods. So we started refactoring. That brought us down to 25, which is still not great, but it has helped with the app's launch time. Now we are going more towards a framework-oriented architecture, where the main app just integrates several of the internal frameworks which implement features. That makes it much easier for us to test and develop more engineers at the same time. And it also helps with onboarding new engineers, since they do not have to learn about the entire codebase. Now, as the codebase is getting larger, there will always be some technical debt. There are always that part of the code that you know that are poorly written or bad performing, or they may even behave oddly in some cases, in edge cases. But you do not always have the time to fix them. So it's good to think ahead. When you are developing a new feature that will use that old code, take a little bit more time and clean it up on the way. Try to keep that balanced, and the technical debt will definitely stay as low as possible, but it's almost impossible to get rid of it completely. Now the code base is becoming too large for you to oversee everything in detail. The app was your baby on the start. You made it yourself from scratch, and you poured months and years of engineering into it. But it has now grown, and you have to let that control go. Stay involved as much as you like, of course, but your responsibilities have also grown, so there will be less coding for you at some point. And this was one of the hardest things for me to get used to, but it was also necessary. So begin to empower your fellow teammates. You should give them their own responsibilities and start delegating your smaller tasks. That also helps them evolve and improve, and they deserve your trust. That's why you hire them, right? You can start small, delegate things like crash reporting, code reviews, or similar things. Mentor them and learn them, and they will learn how to make bigger engineering decisions on their own. Do not make decisions yourself instead of them. You should rather guide them and lead them, and do not become a dictator. Let people grow on their own. In my opinion, engineers need to have some freedom. We all like to learn about new technologies and concepts, so try to support that as much as possible. You should ensure that the knowledge is flowing between engineers. Try organizing some internal tech talks, workshops, or go to conferences together. Everyone should feel comfortable to speak out in any situation. Each company has their own unique culture, and engineering is always a big part of that in mobile business. And building that culture is now your responsibility. So keep on nurturing it in years to come. You're lucky, and your company is now growing beyond anything you had imagined at the start. You start familiarizing yourself with terms such as key performance indicators, lifetime value, cost of acquisition, and unit economics. The more customers you have, the more a smaller change can affect your entire company. For example, when we started pushing out annual subscriptions instead of monthly ones, at the same time, our customer acquisition costs would decrease and we increased our lifetime value. And that had a long-term impact on our business. So make sure that you know which metrics and KPIs you will observe and which of those are the most important for your app and your customers. You have to set up a good analytics system and collect some data. So start measuring early and continue to optimize your app. Depending on your business model, there will always be plenty of options regarding your storefront. If it's your App Store page, use the screenshots and the promotional video to sell the story. If your app is free, people will try it out more often and then decide to purchase it later. In that case, you will have to design and build your own paywall, so try to optimize it as much as possible. Keep changing it and measure the conversion rate. It might be a good idea to build it in a way where you can change it without publishing a new update to the App Store. People usually appear happier if they can try your app before they decide to purchase it. So give them a free trial option or a limited version. And carefully observe your conversion rate. There are always several factors that can affect it. Usually they will be changing at the same time. We have actually discovered that when Apple releases a new major iOS version, we observe a big drop in conversion rate. Sometimes it's because the terms and conditions of the App Store change, and that means the users have to go into their App Store profile to accept those. And that can also happen on your paywall. So some will just forget to come back into the app. And where there's a new iOS device released, the expectations are very high. You need to support it fast enough, or otherwise those early adopters of the device will be disappointed. Maybe you're trying a different audience on your marketing channels, or maybe Apple had featured you. So into your app, there will be coming a lot of people that aren't really your ideal customers, which of course will cause a big drop in the conversion rate. And we all get a little bit more spendy around Christmas. So a lot of companies put more money into advertising. So it is a little harder to stay visible. A good social media presence will help here. So today, our team had grown beyond 30 people, but we are still learning each day. We have reached number 5 in kids category of the top grossing apps on the US App Store. But we're still changing and evolving our app, and we're working hard to make it better. So to sum it up, here are my 5 tips for your business. To start, you do not need a viral idea. You need a good team. You put in lots of hard work and a little bit of luck. Stay in that MVP mindset. So always ship the minimal feature set possible. And there is no need to hold back the release of your app until everything is absolutely perfect. I suggest that you ship it and fix the smaller issues in later updates. Always keep learning about your user and your customer, and continue to do that every day. And one of the greatest assets of your company is your team. So always empower them, and together you will be on the path to do great things. Thank you.